Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. My name is May Stillwell. I used to flinch at the sound of glass breaking. Even now, at 65, the crack of a drop cup can pull me right back to that night. I remember the smell of stew burning in the pot, the clock ticking above the doorway, and Raymond's boots on the kitchen tiles, slow, deliberate steps that made my heart stop. He didn't have to shout anymore. Silence had become his favorite weapon. I was standing by the counter, pretending to wash dishes, when he came behind me. His breath was warm on my neck, full of whiskey and hate. He said I'd forgotten to pay the water bill again. I hadn't. I'd just used the money to buy groceries for the week. But that explanation never mattered. He grabbed the plate from my hand, hurled it against the wall, and said, "You can't do anything right, can you, May?" I remember watching it shatter, thinking not about fear, but how beautiful the pieces looked on the floor under the light. Like broken stars. When people ask why women stay, I wish they could have seen my face in that reflection on the floor. It wasn't weakness, it was survival. Every bruise had a rule attached. Don't talk back, don't cry, don't let the neighbors hear. And in Brentwood, Tennessee, you don't make noise about your marriage. The lawns stay trimmed, the curtains stay closed, and everyone pretends they're happy. For 30 years, I played that part perfectly. I smiled at block parties, made casseroles for the church, even helped Raymond iron his shirts for Sunday service. Folks would say, "May, you're lucky to have such a hard-working man." And I'd nod because what else could I do? They didn't see what happened after the lights went out, when his voice changed and the man I married disappeared. But that night, the night he broke me, something in me shifted. I stopped praying for peace and started planning for freedom. I remember standing at the sink, my hand trembling as the faucet dripped. Each drop sounded like a countdown. I thought about running, really running, but where would I go? My daughter, Lily, had long moved away. I couldn't show up on her doorstep with bruises and tears. She thought her mama was strong. That lie was the only thing I still owned. Raymond was pacing behind me, muttering about bills, about how useless I'd become. Then he slammed his fist on the table, so hard that the salt shaker tipped over. The sound jolted me, and before I knew it, I'd said something I'd never dared say before. "You're not angry at me, Raymond. You're angry at yourself." His face went blank, then red, so red it scared me. And then he smiled a slow, cruel smile. "Is that so?" he said, reaching for the coffee pot. The next thing I knew, the pot hit the floor, shattering like my courage, and coffee splashed across my legs, burning hot. He didn't hit me that night, not the way he used to. He didn't have to. His silence was worse. He just leaned close, whispering that I'd regret talking back. Then he went to bed like nothing had happened, leaving me there with my heart beating out of rhythm. I cleaned up the mess in silence, just as I had so many times before. But as I knelt on that kitchen floor, gathering the broken pieces of glass and ceramic, something inside me refused to bend this time. I remember thinking, if he breaks me again, I'll never find the pieces. So I decided right there, I'd save myself before he finished the job. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, the street light painting long shadows across the room, and I wrote a letter to my daughter. I didn't know if I'd send it yet. I just needed proof that I still existed, that May Stillwell was more than a ghost in her own home. By sunrise, the house was quiet. I could hear the morning birds outside, the hum of sprinklers from the neighbor's yard, the world moving on like nothing had happened. Raymond snored in the bedroom, the same steady rhythm that had haunted me for 3 decades. I stood at the doorway, watching him. The man who once promised me forever looked small now, fragile even, and that made me angry. Angry that I had wasted half my life shrinking myself for him. Angry that I had mistaken fear for loyalty. I picked up my wedding ring from the dresser. It felt heavy, colder than metal should. I slipped it into my pocket and whispered, "You'll regret this, Raymond." He didn't hear me, but I did. It was the first time my voice didn't shake. And I swear to you that morning, as the light touched his face in mine, I knew one thing for certain. He might have broken me that night, but I was already building the woman who'd break him back. People think broken women were always fragile. That's the lie I hate the most. I wasn't born afraid. I was fire once. Wild, loud, and full of foolish dreams. When I was 19, I could sing Patsy Cline from memory, cook cornbread from scratch, and still make it to the factory by sunrise. My mama used to say I had too much sparkle for a small-town girl. Maybe that's what drew Raymond to me. He was older, steady, and had the kind of confidence that made you think he could fix anything. He came into the diner where I worked, sat at the counter every morning, and said, "You make coffee like it's a love letter, May." I should have known then. Real love doesn't sound like flattery, it sounds like home. But I was young and he made me feel seen. I didn't realize he was studying me, memorizing the ways to dim my light before I even knew I had one worth protecting. We married fast. Too fast. The kind of wedding that smells like church flowers and bad decisions. He promised me a house with a porch swing and a dog, and for a while he kept his word. The first year we laughed a lot. I'd cook dinner. He'd hum old country songs while fixing things around the house. But it changed after the miscarriage. We'd been trying for a baby, and when it happened, something in him cracked. He started blaming me, saying maybe I'd worked too hard, or didn't take care of myself. That was the first time I saw the look, the one that said I was less than him. I didn't fight back. I just nodded, thinking love meant patience. But every apology came slower, every insult sharper. One night he told me, "You should be grateful I even chose you." And just like that, the woman I used to be, the one who believed she was enough, started fading like sunlight in a dirty window. I learned early that silence could keep me safe. If I stayed quiet, the storm passed quicker. So I became the quietest woman in Brentwood. Neighbors called me Sweet May, said I was calm, gentle. But calm is just another word for caged when you've got nowhere to go. I remember one morning when Mrs. Keating next door brought me pie, and I had to hide the bruise behind my collar. She smiled and said, "Raymond sure takes care of you." I smiled back and said, "Yes, ma'am." And maybe that's when I realized the world didn't want my truth. They wanted the version that fit their postcard picture of our little town. Neat, tidy, and ignorant. So I built walls with my smiles and locked the truth inside. But sometimes when the house was empty, I'd look at myself in the mirror and whisper, "Where did you go, May?" I never had an answer. By the time Lily was born, I'd already learned to time my tears between his moods. I wanted her to grow up believing her father was good, so I hid the shouting and the slammed doors. I told myself I was protecting her, but really I was protecting the lie. When she was 7, she asked me once, "Mama, why don't you ever sing anymore?" And I didn't know how to tell her that somewhere between Raymond's anger and my silence, my voice had been stolen. I tried humming one night while washing dishes, but when Raymond came home, I stopped mid-note. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might give out. It's strange, isn't it? How fear becomes routine. You stop noticing it until one day you can't remember the sound of your own laughter. That's the part one grieved the most. Not the years, not the bruises, but the woman I buried to keep peace. Now, when I sit here and think about the woman I used to be, I don't pity her anymore. I understand her. She did what she had to do to survive. But survival has a price. It costs you your reflection. For 30 years, I looked in mirrors and saw a stranger. The hair grayer, the eyes duller, the smile forced. I used to tell myself, maybe this is just what love becomes when you get older. But deep down, I knew better. I wasn't living, I was waiting. Waiting for courage, waiting for a sign, waiting for a reason to leave that would feel big enough to justify the years I'd wasted. Turns out, the reason was already growing inside me all along. That night, after he broke me, something in me finally woke up. The woman I used to be, she wasn't gone. She was just waiting for me to remember her name. You don't just wake up one morning and decide to leave a man like Raymond. Freedom isn't a doorway you walk through. It's a slow, secret crawl through the dark. The night he broke me, I lay awake till sunrise, listening to the refrigerator hum and the clock tick. Every sound felt louder than my own heartbeat. Something in me had snapped, quietly but forever. I didn't cry that night. I just stared at the ceiling and thought, if I don't find a way out soon, I'll die here. Not from a beating, not from bruises, but from vanishing completely. By morning, I'd made a promise to myself. I'd start watching him the way he watched me. I'd learn what made him tick, what made him weak. For 30 years, he'd studied me like a subject. Now, it was my turn to take notes. Raymond had patterns. He liked things done a certain way. His coffee black at 6:15, the newspaper folded, his tools lined up in the garage like soldiers. I began memorizing every habit, not out of fear this time, but strategy. When he'd leave for work, I'd check the bank statements, take note of his passwords, even the way he locked the drawer in his office. He thought I was too simple to understand his business. He never noticed how I'd ask questions with a smile. How much did that job bring in? Or when's your next meeting? Like a wife making small talk. But every answer went into a little notebook I hid behind the attic insulation. I wasn't sure what I was building yet, but I knew it was something bigger than my fear. The old May would have just survived. The new one? She was learning to outsmart him. You see, after you've been controlled long enough, freedom doesn't come as a shout. It starts as a whisper. I found my whispers in small rebellions. I started taking long walks again, said it was for my joints, but really it was to breathe air that wasn't his. I opened an email account under a fake name and started reading about women's shelters, divorce laws, survivor stories. Late at night, I'd sit at Lily's old desk, the glow of the screen lighting my face, and feel that spark of something I hadn't felt in decades. Possibility. I wasn't brave yet. I still flinched when I heard his truck pull up, but I'd close the laptop, hide it behind the laundry basket, and think, one day you won't scare me anymore. Every secret click of that mouse was a step toward freedom. The hardest part was pretending I still loved him. Every yes, dear, every cooked meal, every kiss on the cheek, it was all part of my disguise. I knew that if he suspected even a whisper of rebellion, it'd all be over. There were nights when I'd stand in the kitchen, knife in, hand cutting vegetables, and imagine walking out the front door with nothing but my purse and car keys. But leaving wasn't enough. No, I didn't want to just escape. I wanted him to feel what I'd felt, small, powerless, invisible. For 30 years, he'd stolen my choices. Now I was building the patience to steal back my dignity, piece by piece. I'd read once that revenge is a meal best served cold. Well, I'd been freezing for decades. The temperature felt just right. By my 65th birthday, the plan was no longer a dream. It was a map. I knew the accounts he used to hide money, the names of the women he'd lied to, the deals he'd made off the books. Every secret he thought was buried, I had written down. But I also knew I couldn't just expose him. I had to do it in a way that left him watching everything crumble from his own hands. So I waited. I waited through birthdays, holidays, even the anniversary he forgot. He'd pour himself a drink, brag about being a self-made man, and I'd smile, knowing someday soon that same glass would shake in his hand when he realized who had truly built his empire and who could destroy it. Freedom wasn't a door. It was a fuse, and I had already lit it. There's a particular hush that comes right before a storm. The neighbor's dog stops barking, the air tastes like metal, and even the cicadas quiet down to listen. That hush settled over our house the month I decided to light the first match. I started small. A phone call to my niece in Nashville. Something about a recipe, just to hear another woman's voice. A lunch at the church hall where I sat 2 tables away from Mrs. Keating and let her talk about grandchildren while I watched the door. The important work was invisible, copying pages from Raymond's ledgers when he left them on the desk, sneaking his phone into my pocket while he dozed in front of the TV, learning the code he used for his email from the sticky note he hid under the stapler. Each little theft felt like stealing back a piece of myself. No drama, no fireworks, but with each secret I took, my chest loosened a little. The woman who used to fold herself into a corner was coming out of hiding, one quiet theft at a time. One evening, as the sun slid down behind the maples lining our Brentwood Street, I found a folder tucked behind a stack of unpaid bills, an envelope of receipts tied with a rubber band and labeled in Raymond's cramped handwriting. Old partners. My hand shook so badly I nearly dropped it. Inside were invoices, names I didn't recognize, and a check stub with a deposit to an account I'd never seen. It felt like finding an extra room in a house you thought you knew. My mind raced. If I could prove he was hiding money, I could secure my freedom without begging. But evidence is a dangerous thing. It burns both the holder and the burned. I made myself a rule. Never get caught with the truth in your apron pocket. So I tucked the folder inside the false bottom of my jewelry box and wrapped it in a doily. It sounds foolish, hiding paper under lace, but Raymond never looked in the pretty places. He never believed I would. The more I learned, the bolder I became. I started to plant seeds among neighbors, tiny, harmless things that would someday grow into corroboration. I reminded Mrs. Hannigan about a job Raymond had done and watched her frown, then remember. I sent Lily a postcard from a place I'd never been, just to make her call and ask about it. Each call let me hear her laugh, to know her voice was still warm and mine. I never wanted her to see me as a victim. I wanted to be the woman she could be proud of. The plan required patience, simmering, not boiling. I also began to test Raymond, asking subtle questions about contracts while folding laundry, watching how his jaw would clench or his eyes would dart. When he lied, I learned the pattern of his tongue. A liar always reveals a rhythm. You learn to catch it, and when you do, you can predict the next beat. Then came the night that almost ruined everything. The night he nearly saw the match I'd lit. He was home early, hungrier for control than for supper, and the house smelled like the bitter tang of his bourbon. I'd been up in the attic, careful as a thief, prying at the insulation to reach the little notebook I kept hidden there. I heard the porch door before I heard his boots and froze. For a terrifying second, I thought I'd been discovered, that every small victory would burn to ash. He called my name slow, like he was savoring fear. "May," he said. My heart nearly stopped. I lay still on my belly behind a trunk, the notebook inches from my fingers. He shuffled into the hallway, paused, then walked on. He didn't come upstairs. He never came upstairs. He believed the house belonged to him more than he believed in his own bones. I crawled out afterwards like a burglar who'd been spared and felt a surge of arrogant joy. I'd almost been caught, and I'd survived it. The spark hadn't died. If anything, it flared brighter. After that night, everything changed tone. The petty thefts became a campaign. I opened a bank account in my name. Not grand gestures, just a small savings where I funneled cash I'd set aside from the quilting group, from the extra jars of preserves I sold at the church bazaar. I booked an appointment with a lawyer under the guise of updating a will I'd had since my marriage, just to ask questions and feel the legal air on my face. Each appointment, each secret deposit, was a note in a song I was writing for the day I'd walk out. I practiced the speech, "I'm leaving," like a prayer. But I also practiced the face I'd wear when he realized what I'd done. Calm, not gloating. This was not about cruelty, it was about balance. He had stolen 30 years of my life. I wouldn't steal his life back in anger. I would collect his consequences like rent due. The fuse was no longer hidden. It lay coiled and ready, but it would be me who decided when to light it. Freedom doesn't knock politely. It barges in when your courage finally outweighs your fear. For me, that day came on a rain-soaked Thursday. Raymond had left early for a client meeting, and the house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the slow drip from the kitchen faucet. I remember sitting at the table with a stack of papers, the bank account statements, the copies of his secret contracts, the letter from the lawyer who'd called me Mrs. Harper with a kindness I hadn't heard in years. My hands were trembling, not from weakness, but from adrenaline. I wasn't imagining escape anymore. I was preparing it. I sealed the documents in a brown envelope and wrote one word across it in blue ink: insurance. I tucked it inside my coat pocket, took one deep breath, and stepped into the rain. I didn't know where I was going yet, only that I was finally moving toward something that didn't include his shadow. I drove to a small cafe on Franklin Road, one of those places with chipped mugs and the smell of cinnamon in the air. I'd seen it hundreds of times, but never dared to stop. That morning I did. The waitress, a young woman with freckles, smiled at me like I wasn't invisible. "Rough weather, huh?" she said, pouring coffee into a cup that felt warm against my cold hands. I smiled back, but my heart was racing like a thief's. On the far side of the cafe sat a man in a gray suit, the lawyer I'd spoken to on the phone. I hadn't told him the full story yet, just hinted at it. When he looked up and nodded, something inside me settled. I walked to his table, my shoes squeaking on the wet floor, and said softly, "It's time." He didn't ask what I meant. He just gestured to the chair and said, "Then let's begin." It was the first time in 3 decades that someone had listened without interrupting me. I told him everything: the hidden accounts, the bruises, the silence that followed every broken dish and every broken promise. He listened quietly, occasionally taking notes, but mostly letting me talk, as if he knew that speaking the words out loud was part of the rescue itself. "Mrs. Harper," he said finally, "you've already done the hardest part." I wanted to laugh, but tears came instead. The hardest part wasn't the bruises or the lies. It was the pretending. The pretending to still be in love, to still be grateful, to still be his. When we finished, he handed me a card and said, "Keep this somewhere safe. And if you ever feel afraid, call me, day or night." I slid the card into my purse and left the cafe feeling both terrified and alive. The air smelled like wet pavement and rain. For the first time in years, I looked up instead of down when I walked. When I returned home, Raymond's truck was already in the driveway. My pulse spiked. I wasn't supposed to be gone that long. I parked down the street, waited until my hand stopped shaking, then walked up the driveway like nothing had changed. But everything had. He met me at the door, his jaw tight. "Where have you been?" he asked. I smiled, that same practiced, polite smile I'd worn for decades. "Bible study," I said. "It ran late." He looked at me for a long time, the way a hunter watches for movement in the brush. Then he stepped aside. I walked past him, every sense alert, every nerve burning. I knew then that the line had been crossed, not by accident but by choice. I was no longer waiting for a chance. I had taken it, and though he didn't know it yet, the power in that house had shifted. It was small and quiet, but it was mine. That night, as he snored beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow circles above our bed. I thought about the envelope in my purse, the lawyer's number, and the secret account that now had my name on it. I also thought about Lily, my daughter, and how I'd tell her one day that her mother finally remembered who she was. I reached for the small scar on my wrist, a souvenir from a night years ago when I'd tried to fight back and lost. I touched it gently, not as a wound, but as proof that I'd survived. Then I whispered into the dark, "It's almost over." The house creaked like it had heard me. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like thunder, like something big was about to break. And for the first time, I wanted it to. You can always feel it before it happens, that shift in the air when everything you've been hiding starts to tremble at the edges. The week after my secret meeting, Raymond changed. He wasn't shouting yet, but the quiet had a new weight to it, like the house itself was holding its breath. He'd startle easily, open drawers he'd never cared about before, check his briefcase twice before leaving for work. One night, I caught him standing in the doorway, just watching me, not saying a word, just watching. My heart thudded in my chest, but I smiled the way I always did. "You all right, dear?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "You been busy lately?" His tone wasn't angry. It was curious. Too curious. "Just church things," I said, drying my hands on a towel. But the way his eyes lingered told me he didn't believe me. That was the night I realized the clock had started ticking. The storm was coming. I could smell it in the air. Heavy, electric, inevitable. The next few days felt like living inside a thundercloud. Every sound, a door creak, a phone ring, a car outside, made my pulse jump. I double-checked my hiding places, deleted emails, and started locking the attic door at night. But secrets have a scent, and Raymond was sniffing it out. He started asking questions about money, where the checkbook was, how much we had left in the savings. "You don't need to worry about that," I said, my voice as even as I could make it. But he was circling me now, like a wolf testing the fence. That Sunday during church, I couldn't focus on a single hymn. The preacher's voice sounded far away, and all I could think was, he knows something. When I got home, I found my jewelry box moved 2 inches to the left. It was small, but to me it was a scream. He'd been looking. My heart sank. He was too close to the truth. I had to act faster. That evening, I made dinner like nothing was wrong. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, his favorite kind of gravy. The smell filled the house, but my hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the carving knife. He came in late, silent, his boots muddy from the yard. We ate without speaking for what felt like hours. Then, halfway through, he said it. "I know you've been hiding something." My fork froze midair. I didn't ask how he knew. The way he said it told me it wasn't a guess. "What are you talking about?" I managed to whisper. He leaned back, eyes cold. "You think I'm stupid, May? You think I don't see you sneaking around? Whispering on the phone?" My mouth went dry. I wanted to tell him everything and nothing at once. But I remembered what the lawyer had said. Never confess to a man who thrives on control. So I smiled a small, sad smile and said, "Raymond, the only thing I'm hiding is how tired I am." He stared at me for a long time before finally standing up and walking out. The door slammed like thunder. My breath came back in shudders. That night, sleep didn't come. The air conditioner hummed, the crickets sang outside, but my mind was racing. I knew this was the point of no return. The plan couldn't just live in envelopes and whispers anymore. I needed a way out now. Around midnight, I slipped out of bed, grabbed the envelope marked insurance, and went into the kitchen. I placed it inside the old cookie tin labeled flour, the one he never opened, and taped it shut. If something happened to me, I needed someone to find it. Then I sat at the table and wrote a letter to Lily. I told her everything. Not the ugly parts, not the bruises, but the truth about who her mother really was and what she'd finally done. I sealed it, wrote her name in shaky handwriting, and hid it under the floorboard beneath the kitchen rug. I didn't know if I'd live to see her read it, but I needed her to know I wasn't just his wife. I was a woman who fought back, even if it took me 30 years. The storm came the next night. Not rain him. He came home drunk, angrier than I'd ever seen him. The door hit the wall so hard a picture frame fell and shattered. "You lied to me," he snarled, the smell of whiskey thick in the air. My mind screamed, but my voice stayed calm. "You're drunk, Raymond. Sit down before you hurt yourself." He grabbed my arm so hard I felt his fingerprints sink into my skin. "Don't you tell me what to do," he hissed. For a moment, I saw the young man he used to be, handsome, proud, lost, but that version was gone, swallowed by something darker. Then, like lightning through my bones, something in me snapped. I twisted free, shoved him back, and shouted, "I'm not afraid of you anymore." The words echoed through the house like thunder. He stared at me, stunned, then stormed out into the night, slamming the door behind him. I sank to the floor, shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer force of finally standing up. The storm had arrived, yes, But I wasn't the one who'd be destroyed by it. The morning after he stormed out, the house felt hollow. Quiet, but not peaceful. The kind of quiet that comes after glass shatters and you're still too scared to move your feet. I sat at the kitchen table, my arm throbbing where he'd grabbed me, and watched sunlight crawl across the floorboards. A mug of coffee went cold in my hands. For the first time, I didn't cry. I just breathed. Every inhale felt like a small victory, like I was taking air he'd once claimed for himself. Around noon, his truck rolled into the driveway, slow and mean, and my stomach twisted. But when he walked in, he didn't yell. He just looked at me, really looked, as if trying to decide whether I was still the woman he could break. I met his gaze without blinking. "Your breakfast is on the stove," I said evenly. He didn't touch it. He just grunted, grabbed his keys again, and left. The door slammed, but this time it didn't sound like thunder. It sounded like defeat. That evening I drove into town. My hands were steady now, my heart quiet. I went straight to the bank, the same one where he'd opened all those secret accounts. The clerk recognized me. "Mrs. Harper, how lovely to see you," and handed me the paperwork I'd requested. I'd told the lawyer I was ready, and he'd prepared everything. Within an hour, I had a new account under my name only, and the first wire transfer went through. Just a small amount, but enough to prove I could live without his permission. As I walked out of the bank, the sun hit my face and I almost laughed. I hadn't realized how light freedom could feel, like a loose thread that, once pulled, unravels years of silence. I drove to the park afterward, sat on a bench near the duck pond, and watched the water shimmer. That's when I whispered to myself, "You did it, May." A jogger passed by and smiled at me, and for the first time in decades I smiled back, not the polite, practiced one. A real smile, one that belonged only to me. But freedom never comes without consequence. The next day, Raymond found the bank notice in the mail. I hadn't expected it so soon. I was out on the porch watering my roses when I heard the screen door slam behind me. "What's this?" he barked, waving the letter like a weapon. My throat went dry, but my mind was clear. "It's my account," I said. "My money." The way his face changed, that flash of disbelief, then rage, it was like watching a storm rebuild itself in seconds. "Your money," he spat. "Everything in this house is mine." He threw the letter at my feet. The wind caught it and blew it into the yard, landing among the rose petals. I bent to pick it up, calm as ever, and said, "Not any more." For a long second he didn't move. Then he turned and left, no shouting, no hitting, just silence. And somehow that silence scared me more than anything else, because silence means a man's thinking, and thinking men make plans. That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window with the lights off, watching the street. Brentwood was peaceful as always, porch lights glowing, dogs barking faintly, the smell of barbecue drifting through the air. But inside, my house felt like a battlefield before dawn. I knew he'd try something. Maybe he'd drain the accounts, maybe he'd threaten me, maybe worse. But I was done running. I'd hidden too long behind closed doors. I went to the closet, pulled out a small suitcase and packed the essentials, my documents, my mother's locket, Lily's baby photos, and the letter I'd written her. I set it by the door. My plan wasn't to disappear. It was to survive on my terms. The house creaked softly, almost like it was listening. "Not tonight," I whispered. "Tomorrow." That word, tomorrow, was the first time I'd allowed myself to imagine a life beyond the walls that had trapped me. The storm had torn through, yes, but now I could see the sky again. At sunrise, the world looked brand new. The air smelled clean. The streets glistened from last night's rain, and the light touched the curtains like forgiveness. I made coffee, fed the cat that always lingered on my porch, and wrote one more letter, this time to Raymond. "By the time you read this," I wrote, "I'll be gone. You don't owe me any more. I've given you half my life. I'm keeping the rest for myself." I placed it on the kitchen table beside his coffee cup, perfectly aligned like a final offering. Then I took one last look at the house, the pictures on the wall, the chair by the window, the place where I'd spent years pretending to be small, and stepped outside. The morning air wrapped around me like a blessing. I didn't know what came next, but I knew what was behind me. And for the first time in 30 years, I wasn't afraid to look forward. I didn't make it far before I saw his truck, parked across from the diner, just outside Brentwood, the one where I used to meet my church friends. My heart dropped, but I didn't turn back. I parked 2 blocks away, slipped my phone into my coat pocket, and walked toward the bus stop. The November air bit at my cheeks. When I heard the door of his truck slam, I didn't flinch. "May." His voice carried across the street, not the loud, commanding one I'd known for years, but raw, desperate. I kept walking. He crossed the street fast, grabbing my arm before I reached the corner. "You think you can just walk away from me?" His grip was hard, but not as strong as it used to be. Maybe because for the first time I didn't freeze. I looked him dead in the eyes and said, "I already did." People were watching now, a young couple, a man from the gas station. He noticed too. His hand loosened, but the fury in his eyes didn't fade. He hissed, "You'll regret this," and walked back to his truck. I didn't breathe until I saw his taillights disappear. That night, I checked into a small motel off Franklin Road. The neon sign outside flickered vacancy in red letters, painting the curtains in a soft, eerie glow. I sat on the bed, hands trembling, but not from fear, from release. My whole life fit in that one suitcase, and for once it was enough. I called Lily, my voice steady but low. "I left him," I said. Silence on the other end, then a sharp inhale. "Mom, are you safe?" "I am," I whispered. She cried softly, then said words I never thought I'd hear. "I'm proud of you." Those words cracked something inside me. I'd spent years imagining her blaming me, resenting me for staying. But now I realized she'd just been waiting for me to save myself. We talked until the motel clock struck midnight. Before hanging up, she said, "Don't go back, Mom, no matter what he says." I promised her I wouldn't, but deep down, I knew Raymond wasn't finished. Men like him don't end things quietly. At 2 a.m., headlights flashed through the blinds. My heart skipped. A truck engine idled outside, familiar, low growling. I moved to the window and peeked through the slit. It was him. My pulse thundered. He sat there, staring at the door, engine running. The motel sign flickered again, casting him in flashes of red and darkness, like a warning light. I reached for the phone, dialed the police, and whispered, "My husband's outside. He's not supposed to be here." The dispatcher's calm voice told me to stay on the line, that officers were on the way. But minutes felt like hours. Raymond stepped out of the truck, slammed the door, and walked toward my room. I backed away, gripping the lamp like a weapon. A knock, slow, deliberate. "May, open the door," he said. "We need to talk." His tone wasn't angry. It was worse, calm. "You've made a mistake," he murmured through the door. I held my breath until red and blue lights cut through the night. He turned his head, saw the cops, and froze. When they cuffed him, I thought I'd feel joy. But all I felt was exhaustion, 30 years of it. The officers asked if I wanted to press charges. My voice shook when I said yes. They nodded, professional and kind, and one of them, a young woman, looked me straight in the eye. "You did the right thing," she said softly. I believed her. Raymond didn't speak as they led him away, but his eyes did. That same cold defiance that used to make me shrink. Only now it didn't work. I went back inside, closed the door, and slid down to the floor. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was clean. I stared at the lamp still clutched in my hand and started to laugh. Quiet at first, then uncontrollable. It wasn't joy, not exactly, it was release. Laughter that sounded like crying. I'd spent 30 years trying to survive a man who never wanted me alive inside. And now here I was, alive, shaking, free. I looked out the window as the police cars disappeared into the distance and whispered, "You can't break me any more." By sunrise, the world outside looked washed, pale gold light spilling over wet asphalt. I stood in front of the mirror, hair wild, eyes swollen, but I didn't see a broken woman. I saw a survivor. My reflection looked older, yes, but also lighter, like some invisible weight had been peeled off me. I packed my bag, checked out of the motel, and drove toward the city. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew what I was driving away from. Every mile felt like a new heartbeat. I rolled down the window, let the wind tangle my hair, and thought about Lily, about what kind of mother I could still be at 65. When I reached the edge of Brentwood, I saw the welcome sign fade in my rearview mirror, and I smiled, not out of revenge, not even triumph, just peace, because sometimes the reckoning isn't about punishing the past, it's about reclaiming your future. 3 months after that night, I'd settled into a quiet rhythm. I was renting a small yellow house on the edge of Franklin, just 20 minutes from Brentwood, but it felt like another world. The mornings smelled of coffee and honeysuckle. The neighbors waved. I joined a book club at the library and started tending to a little patch of roses in the backyard. For the first time in decades, I could breathe without waiting for footsteps behind me. Lily visited often. She said I looked younger, freer. Sometimes I caught myself humming while doing dishes, something I hadn't done since my 20s. But peace, I've learned, has a strange way of testing you. It comes quietly, and then one day it trembles. That tremble came one evening when I checked the mailbox and found an envelope with no return address. My stomach tightened before I even opened it. Inside was a photo, a picture of my house taken from across the street. On the back, in crooked handwriting, it said, "You can't hide forever." My hand shook. I looked up, scanning the empty road. The sky above Brentwood was burning orange, and I realized the past had found me again. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floorboard sounded like a warning. Every car headlight that passed painted ghosts on my wall. I called the police in the morning, showed them the note, the photo. The officer was kind, said he'd file a report, but I could tell from his tone he didn't think much would come of it. "He's out on bail, isn't he?" I asked. The officer hesitated, then nodded. "We're monitoring him," he said. I smiled weakly. I'd heard those words before. Lily wanted me to come stay with her in Nashville for a while, but I refused. If I run again, I told her, he still wins. So I stayed. I started locking every door, keeping the porch light on all night, sleeping with my phone by the bed. Days passed without incident, but I could feel him, like a shadow stretching across the hours. Then, one Sunday morning, I saw something that made my blood run cold. In the middle of my rose garden, buried under loose soil, was my old locket. The one he'd smashed years ago, the one I never took from that house. That's when I knew he'd been here. I didn't tell Lily, not yet. I couldn't bear the worry in her voice again. Instead, I went to the hardware store, bought cameras, motion lights, even a new lock for the back door. The young man at the counter must have seen something in my eyes because he said, "Ma'am, you okay?" I just nodded and said, "I'm tired of being afraid." That night, I sat in my living room, lights dimmed, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. I watched the front door, waiting. Midnight came and went. Then, at 2:17 a.m., the motion light outside flickered on. My heart stopped. I peered through the curtains, and there he was, standing on the edge of the yard, still a stone. He wasn't shouting, wasn't moving, just watching. The camera caught his face, hollow, angry, lost. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I dialed 911, whispered my address, and said, "He's back." When the sirens grew louder, he turned and disappeared into the dark woods behind the property. This time, I didn't chase fear, I faced it, because I knew deep down he wasn't coming to win me back. He was coming to destroy what I'd rebuilt. The next morning, the police searched the woods. They didn't find him, but they found his truck abandoned near a gas station. Inside, they found old photos of us, of the house we'd shared, of me sleeping. One of the officers asked if I wanted a restraining order renewed. I told him I don't want paper. I want peace. But the law takes time and fear doesn't wait. I spent the day with Lily, finally telling her everything. She cried and said, "Mom, I can't lose you." I held her hands and said, "You won't. Not this time." That night, back home, I left the porch light off for the first time. I made tea, sat in the dark, and waited not for him but for courage. Around midnight, I heard the crunch of gravel. Then silence. I reached under the couch, where I'd hidden the pepper spray and the phone. "If you come near me again," I whispered into the dark, "you'll wish you hadn't." The silence stretched, then broke, with the sound of tires screeching down the road. I walked to the window and saw nothing but dust. Maybe he was gone. Maybe he'd heard me this time. The next morning, the police called. They'd found him, miles away, asleep in his truck, drunk, muttering my name. He'd been taken in. Again. Only this time, the court didn't release him. They'd found enough to hold him for good. When I hung up, I stood in my kitchen for a long time, letting it sink in. The sunlight fell across the table, warming my hands. The kettle hissed softly. For the first time in 30 years, there was no shadow at the edge of my mind. I stepped outside, barefoot, feeling the dew under my toes. The roses were blooming again, small, bright, defiant. I knelt beside them, fingers brushing the petals. "You survived too," I whispered. And maybe that's when it hit me. That survival isn't about running or hiding. It's about standing your ground when the past comes knocking. I picked the smallest rose, placed it in a jar by the window, and sat down with my tea. The quiet didn't scare me anymore. It felt earned. It felt like mine. I turned 65 on a Sunday morning in June. The kind of morning where the air smells like fresh cut grass and the sun feels gentle on your face. I sat on my porch with a slice of strawberry cake, the kind Lily made just like my mother used to. I was alone, but not lonely. I watched the world wake up, the mail truck rolling down the street, a jogger passing by with his dog, the sound of birds gossiping in the trees. For once, everything felt ordinary, beautifully ordinary. I thought about where I'd been, the woman who flinched at footsteps, who whispered apologies into her pillow. She was gone now. In her place sat someone I barely recognized, someone braver, louder, still scarred but unbroken. I took a sip of coffee, felt the warmth slide down, and smiled to myself. "Happy birthday, May," I whispered. "You made it." And for the first time in 3 decades, I truly believed it. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. It was from the correctional facility upstate, a letter from Raymond. My hands trembled, just seeing his name. I almost threw it away, but something in me needed to read it. His words were surprisingly short. "I hope you're happy," it said. "You took my life from me." I stared at the ink, dark and angry, and then I laughed. Not cruelly, just quietly. Because for years, I'd believed he'd already taken my life. But here I was alive, thriving, growing roses again. I took the letter, tore it in half, and fed it to the fire pit on my porch. The ashes curled into the morning light, like smoke from a ghost finally leaving. I whispered, "You never owned me. You just made me stronger." Then I turned on the radio, let an old country song fill the air, and danced, barefoot, slow, a little off rhythm. That moment wasn't about revenge. It was about release, the kind that takes 30 years to earn. Later that afternoon, Lily came over with her 2 kids, my grandbabies, all energy and laughter. They ran through the yard chasing bubbles, while Lily and I sat on the steps, watching them. "You seem different, Mom," she said, smiling softly. I chuckled. Difference, one word for it. She took my hand, squeezed it tight. "You saved yourself, and you saved me too." Her words hit deep, and I felt my throat close up. For so long, I'd carried guilt like a second skin. Guilt for staying, for not protecting her enough. But now, sitting under the Tennessee sun, I realized something simple and sacred. Survival is its own kind of teaching. My daughter learned strength by watching me stand up at last. That's the legacy I wanted to leave, not the pain but the rising after it. I looked at the children running barefoot through the grass and whispered to myself, they'll never know that kind of fear. Not while I'm here. That evening I walked to the garden, my roses in full bloom now, red and gold, thick with summer scent. I sat by the soil where I'd once found that broken locket. This time I held a new one. A small silver heart Lily had given me on my birthday. Inside was a photo of the three of us, me, her, and the kids. I buried it beneath the roots of the strongest rose bush. For new beginnings, I murmured. The wind rustled the leaves, warm and gentle like a whisper of approval. I realized then that healing isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet. It's in the small choices, locking the door, smiling at yourself in the mirror, believing you deserve peace. I touched the petals, soft and wet from the evening dew, and felt gratitude pulse through me like light, for surviving, for freedom, for time, and for the chance to rewrite the story that almost ended me. So, if you're listening to me now, wherever you are, hear this. It's never too late to take your life back. Not at 50, not at 65, not ever. They can break your body, they can try to break your spirit, but they can't touch what's meant to rise again. I thought my story ended in fear, but it ended in fire, quiet, glowing, steady. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, expecting to hear his voice. But then I remember, silence is mine now. My home is mine. My name is mine. I walk through this house every morning and whisper a prayer of thanks, not for what I lost, but for what I found. My freedom, my voice, myself. And when the sun spills across the window, I smile and say, you broke me for 30 years, Raymond, but I made you regret it when I turned 65.